than me and my tone. You can't step to my
Are you comfortable?
Yeah, I think so.
Cozy?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so before we get into our topic, which will be death and maybe what comes after, we have Brandon's
Welcome to
beverage.
the podcast of two dudes talking about stuff.
Two dudes talking about stuff. And you're kind of well-renowned as a foodie, and so we're going to take a little bit of time here, and you ate something interesting this week.
We're going to have a food corner, and we're going to call it the most delicious thing I ate one day, one time.
That's going to be a really long URL.
So this one...
Hold on. Let's move that out of the table. I was just kind of...
This I'm worried about too.
What are you worried about?
I don't know. It's super short.
Seems pretty average to me. Probably a little longer
than
average.
1 3/4.
Probably a little
1
bit.
3/4.
Way
JD.
above average. Yeah, that. Like way above average.
Move it anywhere or just move it around in the picture?
Yeah, just keep throwing it around.
Welcome to Two Dudes Talking About Stuff. Eric?
Don't look into the camera. It creeps everybody out.
Okay. Welcome to Two Dudes Talking About Stuff. And...
Yeah. No. We've already introduced it. We're already going.
No, we're not. You can edit this out.
No, we don't need to edit. Okay, so...
You edit all the time.
Unedited. Little bit of
Do
edited.
an intro. Do the intro
edited.
right here. Start again.
Hey, everybody.
That was really good. You have a good intro voice.
All right, so we're going to introduce our topic today, which is death and what comes after and kind of near-death experiences, and we'll get into why. But we want to start a little thing at the beginning of each episode. You're kind of a foodie, not kind of a foodie. You are a foodie. You describe flavors more in depth than I've experienced anything ever in my life.
Which is a shame.
It is what it is.
We're going to change that. We're going to convert you.
We're going to let you go on every week. You tend to eat something interesting and weird.
It's true.
So what did you eat that was, and what are we going to call this? This is Brandon's Delectable
Delights. No.
B-double-D?
Ooh, I like it. Best thing I ate?
Best thing you ate.
Or really, we could even have it be shout out to the person who made the delicious thing.
So this is like
this is the longest URL of all time.
This is our I don't know.
We're gonna call it a segment.
Our indirect way of trying to get sponsored.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug.
But actually, it comes from a passion, not from that. But yeah. So here we go.
All right. What did you eat this week?
So 5-minute segment.
Everything you ate.
Let me give my everything. All calories every day. I've never done that once. So let me give my CV a little bit as far as it comes to food. Just so people don't think you aren't a foodie, because everybody throws that tag around, and I'm not even going to attach it to myself, but I am going to show them how much my brain processes food and how much it remembers the things that it ate. And so I think they'll have some say to say, oh, if he thinks it's good, actually, I'm going to give that a try. That's
and
really
CV
what I'm
stands for resume. I didn't know what a CV was until several years ago, where someone said, submit your CV, and I had to go Google it. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell Trenton.
What makes you a foodie? Why should I trust you?
So here we go. This is the background. In Italy and in Europe in general, there's not, in some of the cities that I was in, it's a little bit more old school Europe, which means when you walk down the street, you don't necessarily, and they have supermarkets now, but if you want to go to the butcher shop, there's just a butcher shop. In fact, there was even, Americans will balk at this a little bit, but over there it's okay to eat horse meat. So not only do you have a normal butcher shop, then you have another one that does like cured meats, then you have another one that does horse meat, then you have one that does cheeses, and then your bread shop, and then your patisserie shop, which is like a pastry shop. I mean, they have all of these, and there's lots of them in the city. So and gelato, everybody knows that one. And you certainly want to find the one that produces the best gelato. And the only way to find that out is to go in. So really, and you walk a little bit more because they kind of have these centralized cities.
Is there marketing over there? Are they all saying like world's best gelato?
I don't think they care, because a lot of people walk. The cities aren't built like in downtown Salt Lake where it's almost annoying to cross the street, right? It's actually kind of hard to get around on foot downtown, and you have to wait for crosswalks. Over there, I mean, people will just go and cars are looking for them because it's just the common thing. And like on a Sunday evening, they call it a passeggiata, and the whole city goes for a walk. So there's no cars on the street. All the gelato shops are open and everybody does it. So all the gelato shops get a lot of traffic. I explain this only to say this is where the passion came from, because whenever we saw a new pastry shop or a new gelato shop, we went in. And having a pretty good memory and not realizing yet that I had a pretty good flavor palette, I would pay attention to which ones I liked, and I could pick out the different flavors. And Italians kind of do this anyway. Like a good example is mozzarella and olive oil. Like they would talk about olive oil with this passion that you see me talk about other foods, where they would have, because oil obviously takes on the things around it. Like it absorbs quite a lot, because sometimes you'll see people put red peppers inside their oil and then that red pepper diffuses its flavor into the oil. Well, they would even talk about it in like a more intricate, delicate way. For example, in some olive orchards, they would grow tomato plants underneath the olive trees. And they claimed for certain that tomato flavor, which is a flavor most of them want in their food and dishes, because pasta's 85% of what they eat, that olive oil would actually inherit some of the taste qualities of the tomato and the tomato plant just because the olives were exposed to tomato plants below them. And so they would talk about how if you had this olive oil versus that one, that they could taste those flavor differences, which to me kind of blew my mind, because that one seems a bit of a stretch. They didn't even like put the tomatoes in the olive oil, right? Which people have seen that, sun-dried tomatoes. It was just that they were growing tomato plants beneath the olive tree.
Well, and aren't there some that, like wine tasters, that can say, oh, this is from
yes.
the northern hills of this
Yes.
town, of this
Yes.
region?
For sure. Mm-hmm. And as I talk about this, I'll reference a documentary that I watched on Netflix where it was called Jiro Dreams of Sushi. And he is a sushi master, and he only has 6 spots at his table, and every one of them goes for a premium. And he's a 3-star Michelin chef. And it's simply because what he does, he's perfected. And it's interesting because one time he said, and I'd never thought about food this way, but he actually said, I wish I could taste as good as that guy, almost like referring to it as a talent, or almost referring to it as genetics. Like maybe that guy has more taste buds per square inch than I do. And if I could taste like him, I could make my food even better. Because right now I'm limited to the threshold that my senses allow me to cook this food and to prepare this food to where I know it's good. And reference that there was somebody who was even better at that than him. And if he had that, he could make his food even better, because there's no A1 or salt and pepper, or like you take it exactly as he serves it, that temperature with the sauce he puts on it at that moment. And he has already perfected all of that and balanced the flavors and balanced the salinity. And it was just a fascinating documentary from that perspective, to think of he's creating the culinary experience instead of we go to an Outback and they kind of just churn it out, and good food, but kind of the same for everybody. But they don't take that kind of detail to say this salinity and this temperature and this and that need to be all perfect. And I'm the one that's in charge of that and giving you that experience, and you're going to trust me. We almost don't have that level of trust.
Little Caesars feels that level.
It feels that level for you. They've perfected everything. Tomato sauce, pepperoni, cheese. So this was my CV. So this followed me when I came back from Italy, meaning every time I see a patisserie, every time I see a French pastry shop, every time I see a cookie shop or even cupcake shop, I'm like, there's this draw in me that like makes me need to go inside these stores. So TripAdvisor is actually really, really good. Like if you ever wanted to try to find a lunch spot or a dinner spot, if you Google, hey, top 10 bakeries or top 10 restaurants in Salt Lake, TripAdvisor has a really good, review-based 5-star equivalent that everybody's, the users are weighing in on, and it rates them. And it's actually quite good, because sometimes you don't know if those are sponsored or bought, or if like you had to pay to get into the list. Like this one's generally very accurate. Or at least it seems like every one that I've gone to that's in like a top 10 deserves to be there. I'll say it that way. So I'd been doing this before I discovered this TripAdvisor list, and I found the top 20 of the TripAdvisor list, and this was about 4 years ago. And even at that time, as I looked through the list of top 20 bakeries in Salt Lake, there were only 2 that I had not yet been to. So, I mean, yes, I made a plan to go to those, but that's what I'm getting at. Like, I do this and I remember this and I'm like, this place sells the best pain au chocolat. This place sells the best cannoli. This place sells the best chocolate chip cookie. And I remember it, pay attention, and it matters to me. And I even could like give a review of like why I felt like that was the best pastry there, why their other stuff maybe didn't, measure up to that, but go there for that because it's excellent, right? So,
that
to today,
leads us to, that was a really long CV.
I know it was a long
Your
CV,
5 minutes
but
are
I didn't
up,
want
and we're moving on.
moving on, and death. So today, let's show the video. So this is
We'll play it while
Crumble.
Yeah.
And they come out with new flavors every week, and they make an excellent cookie. Everybody's knows what they are at this point. They've blown up across the country, really. But they come out with new flavors every week. Well, they have cookies and cream, and they have a few others that I've seen that kind of hit that same Oreo category. But this week, they fully came out with like a homemade Oreo. So it's a sandwich cookie. Some people call that a whoopie pie. It's got marshmallow fluff inside plus frosting. They even have some Oreo crumbles to help with the texture, and it's sandwiched between 2 homemade large Oreo type cookies. So the video is what I was intrigued by. Crumble does an excellent job with these promo videos. And I thought, hey, like we'll give it a try. The cookies and cream one that they've offered on other weeks was pretty good too. So this is saying something because I try them on a regular basis. You can account for this, but like really quickly, I could say it's the best crumble cookie I've had, so.
Is it because it tastes just like an Oreo?
Actually, yes. Oftentimes with homemade Oreos, they just kind of are making 2 homemade chocolate brownie cookies or chocolate wafer cookies. And so some people might even say about this cookie, oh, I wish it had more chocolate flavor. But be honest, Oreos don't really taste like chocolate. Like they taste like Oreos. And the cream inside is the same. So yes, it tastes like a better homemade Oreo cookie.
Sounds great. Because I'm not a huge fan of Oreos because of the crunchiness. I don't like crunchy cookies.
So that's one of the things that I'm probably more of a soft cookie fan. That doesn't mean I don't like crispy cookies, but in this case, and it's really hard. People don't quite understand to get a perfectly baked cookie, chocolate chip cookie, but especially like on each edge of a whoopie pie or a 2 cookie sandwich to get it the right texture. And it's a lot about how much butter and fats are in there, plus shortening, plus how long you cook it. And a lot of people overcook their cookies. I could have another shout out about that because I went to a place the other day and it was totally devastating because they overcooked their cookies, which is pretty difficult to do.
We won't shout them out.
We won't shout them out.
Only positive shout outs on this channel.
Fantastic. On 5 minute Brandon too long corner.
On
we'll
55-minute Brandon's corner.
So, I mean, the texture was right on. It was cooked perfectly, which is pretty difficult to do on like when you're churning out that many cookies. I'm not a huge fan of additives in frostings like sour cream, cream cheese, and instead, and I'm a huge fan of marshmallows, like they've got marshmallow fluff in these. So, and it crumbled apart because it was a soft cookie, and yet it held
use
together.
The word moist?
It's, let's just say really good texture. But I mean, they paid attention to that, like to where those texture pieces that are actually placed inside the frosting help it to have that crumble apart homemade taste as opposed to like a crispier type of Oreo. Long story short is it was a perfectly balanced like sweetness versus cookie versus textures. I was surprised.
So they have their mixed really boxes. Good. Would you get a whole box of both?
So we started off going hot and heavy and had 4 Oreo cookies in a 12 cookie box and hadn't tried them yet. And sometimes that's a disaster because if you get one that's, let's say, a little bit more style than substance, sometimes that's a little depressing because then you have like 3 leftover cookies that no one's going to eat. And the Oreo ones were gone. Like they're big. It's a lot of cookie because you now have 2 monster-sized cookies because it's a sandwich. But and it wasn't, a lot of the times with their chocolate cookies, it can get just a little bit rich. Like they have a chocolate peanut butter. They have, some chocolate Nutella ones or a chocolate lava cookie, and they're all good, but sometimes that chocolate, like you need a glass of milk.
Feels
it's just
dense,
a lot
like
of,
a black
yes,
hole.
it's really like you eat half of it and you're like, whoa, I'm chocolated out. But this one, that balance of sugar to sweet with the frosting was all, and even my daughter said this was her review. So 14-year-old CV at hers, and she was like, oh my gosh, it tastes like an Oreo. I didn't expect that. I expected some more, you were just putting things together to make it look like an Oreo. No, they actually had it to where even the cream on the inside tastes like Oreo cream. So whoever made up that recipe, it didn't happen overnight, and they had to work really hard to get all those boxes checked, and they did. So
I'm with you on the sour cream and cream cheese fillings. I'm not a fan of those frostings. I just can't do it.
I'm not either. And that was what was pleasantly surprising, because honestly, to get the right texture, oftentimes you have to add something that gives it more substance than just like butter and powdered sugar, because that just doesn't add a lot of, structure to keep things together. And yeah, that's what they did. So I was pleasantly surprised because I anticipated they would have to do something like that. And instead they checked all my boxes. It was delicious.
It's fantastic. I'm a little
job,
disappointed
guys.
You didn't bring one in for me to try.
I know.
But
Well,
whatever.
only one survived, and then I took it home, and then they were all fighting over it. So more will be bought. They'll be done, obviously, with this round of them. It'll come back at some point in time because I'm sure it will be popular. But
All right. Unofficial
till
sponsor
Saturday.
is
Unofficial
the
sponsor.
Oreo
Good job,
cookie from
Crumble.
Crumble.
The official Oreo cookie, because they have a few other ones with either Oreo or cookies and cream. It's actually the homemade
called
marshmallow Oreo.
All right.
Might even be called marshmallow sandwich cookie because maybe they can't say Oreo. I can't remember, but it's pretty epic.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay.
Speaking of death.
Good job, Crumble.
So
Moving
we've
on.
had discussions about death in the past, and
Yes.
I had an interesting one today from a work perspective. We went and visited some people, and I got to meet a person. His name is Bob Howard, and he was just kind of, as I was getting to know him, what he liked to do for fun. He mentions he likes to golf. He likes to go skiing. He was like a search and rescue ski guy up at Park City. All these cool experiences. And the last thing he kind of dropped in there was, oh, I have a podcast. And so I was like, hey, I have a podcast at work. We're doing this. And so what's your topic? And he's like, it's actually called A Close Call with Death. So go look for that. And he's talking about his own experiences where he's had a close call with death and survived, and talking with other people who have had sort of near-death experiences, close calls with death. From what I understand, and I started listening to some of the episodes, but some of them it was just, oh, I almost died, right? But it wasn't like I lost consciousness, I left my body. But he does have, sounds like a couple that did have that happen. So it kind of prompts the discussion around, how do you approach death? What does death mean to you? What is your belief system around what happens after death and those near-death experiences? Because again, we've discussed people that we either know. There's a show on Netflix called Surviving Death that goes over those kinds of things. And I think it's an intriguing topic. So what do you think about death, near-death experiences, and what's happening after this?
Yeah, no, they're super curious because like we were talking a little bit about this before the show, and the people that, let's say, have the out-of-body experience and come back, I mean, they come back with a level of certainty and even urgency, almost to tell others, like, this is what I experienced. And, there's a debate, is it just their brain, like pushing them into some sort of matrix simulation, like telling them there's a light and telling them all these things are happening? But they come back with a certainty that makes it seem like any of us would do. What were the pieces of evidence that made them realize it wasn't just this mental simulation, if in fact they could differentiate? Like, it's right, they're touching things or seeing things, or some things that just they could not in a million years conjure up with all their thought experiences that they've had in life. And then they see somebody that they couldn't possibly know and come back, and then to one of the living survivors, they're like, hey, there was somebody named Jeff. Does that mean anything to you? And then all of a sudden the person's like, yes. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
There's these pieces of evidence that can't possibly be be made up. So, that's the first one. Is it happening, or is it a mental simulation?
Well, and let's start with those near-death experiences, because there's a family member of mine that's had one of those, and I haven't gotten their permission to share their names, but I'll share kind of the story. And this person was going in for surgery, something, I think it was gallstones, and they had split, and one had lodged in her pancreas and one had lodged in her liver or something like that. And so on the operating table, while she is in, I gave away her gender, but while she's in surgery, she is in a different, whatever you want to call it, realm, dimension, whatever.
Yeah.
And somebody who lived in her neighborhood who had passed away before is who she visits. And she has this interaction with this other gal, this other lady. And similar to what we've talked about in the past, there's not a voice conversation. It's not an audible conversation. It's just almost like a telepathic, I know what you're thinking, you know what I'm thinking, and they just understand each other's thoughts instantly.
And so we're communicating, even though in our current earthly definition of communication, it doesn't look like that's happening, and yet they completely understand one another.
Yeah, and it's a much more simple and pure almost form, right? That's not filled with filler words or trying to come up with here. It's just boom, here's what they're thinking. And
almost like a thought download.
Right?
Yeah. You're downloading your thoughts into theirs and vice versa.
Exactly. And the lady who had passed away, the husband, it had been a while, and I don't know the time, but the husband, he was alone, and he was really nervous to start getting back into the dating world because he was still, I mean, it's not like they were a really old couple. He was still middle-aged, and he was hesitant to get to date again. And so the gal that I'm talking about, she comes out of surgery and she asks her doctor, she was like, hey, did something happen during surgery? Mm-hmm. And the doctor gets kind of this nervous look about him, right? Like, and he says, who told you? She's like, what are you talking about? And he says, who told you what happened? She's like, nobody told me. Something weird happened and I didn't know what went on. He's like, yeah, we lost you. Like, you flatlined for like 30 seconds and we brought you back. And so apparently in this, the assumption is during that time is when she has this kind of vision or whatever you want to call it. So she comes out, she goes to the man, the husband of the wife who had been deceased. And she goes, hey, I don't know if this means anything, but I basically died on the operating table and came back. But this is what I saw. And your wife just wants you to know go ahead, like move forward, date other people. She's in the right space. She loves you, but she understands that it's time to move on, right?
Yeah.
And so he just breaks down in tears, and it's this whole thing because it was this whole guilt that he was having around, I don't want to dishonor my deceased wife, but at the same time I do kind of want. And so anyway, that was the experience that this lady had, and it matches up similarly, I think, with several others that we've heard and seen. And then you were talking about one as well. What was the one that you were?
Yeah, no, I had just read about it where it was that urgency. So the person died on an operating table, came back because they brought her back, and just immediately there was this urgency to share this new information she had, which I find something amazing must happen, and they must almost come already feeling the urgency to share it here. Like that's just kind of a unique take. Like if I'm exhausted and I'm coming out from another place that was super confusing, I feel like I'd wake up and just be kind of maybe groggy and still trying to process, well, what just happened? And instead she wakes up and immediately asks for a notepad, because I think she was intubated, and writes, it's real. And later they were able to have clarifying discussions with her, and it meant heaven is real because she'd, seen it and experienced it. And, that just brings up a lot of questions, because in that documentary you watched, and also it sounds like in this example, that 30-second window doesn't have time. Right. And I think a lot of us feel like that is an aspect to heaven, in that 30 seconds is really just 30 seconds to us that almost can expand on the other side, if you will, in heaven, to some almost innumerable amount. Like we don't even know, but it's more than It's 30 seconds.
Well, it's almost like the Matrix thing, right? Where they download the Kung Fu
right.
into his brain and he's just like, I know Kung Fu, right? It's
Right.
almost like instantly you can comprehend so much more that it's not a linear
Or
knowledge
even,
game.
I always really, in talking about this topic, I always really loved what Inception does with the dream layers.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about how, well, yeah, but in a dream, an hour is more like, a year. I can't remember what they said, but then every layer they go deep. So like all the way down to the fourth layer, you see that van coming and falling off the bridge, in the uppermost layer. And yet these layers, it feels like they have no time because it's literally just a van falling down the bridge and you know how fast that happens, or falling to the river under the bridge. And yet in these lower levels, they still have so much time and so much story happens. And I think that's kind of accurate. At least it gives us, who are in this three-dimensional space that's completely confined by time in a very linear way, it gives us an understanding that there could be layers where that way we understand time totally dissolves into a different way, or it exponentially has more in a certain way that we don't totally understand, but that, goes all the way back up to the beginning, where really 30 seconds could be days or years. And then somehow it all fits.
What's so weird too is how much these stories fall in line with each other, right? And there's this guy that does studies all across the world, right?
How similar they are amongst people who don't know each other.
And with different belief systems, right? It's not like only Christians are having this, or only Muslims are having this, or only Buddhists are having this, or whatever. It seems like across cultures, there's very similar experiences that are happening in these near-death experiences. And some of them are where they're in the room on the operating table and they're able to explain the instruments and they're able to recall conversations that were had while they were out. I mean, their heart stopped, nothing's happening. And they're able to say, hey, you said this, or you used this tool.
Right.
And here was the position. They're able to recall exactly who was where around.
Because they were floating above, right? They were
Uh-huh.
looking at it like it was from a third point of view,
Right.
not inside. Yeah.
Right. So I find that really interesting. And so what I don't know, what are your beliefs around what's going to happen after, or what are those other dimensions, or whatever we want to call them?
I like that. Oh, well, so two things. And the second one is the direction I'll go, just because I feel a little bit more intrigued, and that I'll use this quick analogy. So I studied anatomy and physiology in college and didn't need to. It was an elective, and yet it was kind of a more advanced elective. But one of my final logical reasons for doing that was because, well, hey, I need anatomy and physiology. I'm walking around with the subject material all the time. And so when it comes to us here, and let's call it the things we can't see, or the space we can't see, that's around us all the time. So that's very intriguing to me. And I know you and I have mentioned this, but all of this begs the question, and you see this a lot, like, of the visual spectrometer and of that, spectrum that the human eyes can actually see. And, where it's Wi-Fi, there's X-ray, there's so many things that we can't see that genuinely are tangible and exist.
Going through us like every second of every day, right?
Absolutely.
Radio waves.
So what else is here, or how much more of that spectrum exists, and what could possibly, if we had eyes that could differentiate in those spaces, what's here? Because a lot of people talk about, hey, heaven and hell is here.
Yeah.
And, so then all of a sudden, could somebody be outside their body where no one else can see them, but they can? Because there's this, whatever you want to call it, space, dimension, wavelength, where they can exist, even though usually on a normal daily basis, you and I and our eyes can't see into that dimension.
Yeah. What does heaven mean to you?
This feels, well, so the other topic I was going to say was, did we exist before, right? Like, did we come from some sort of a pre-heaven? Because I think that helps us to get to the crux of that question. Because honestly, there's sort of two definitions of heaven that I think get bounced around, at least because, once again, we don't have that perfect language. Heaven is used to say like this paradisical, happy place where lions lay with lambs and we never have want of food and everybody's happy, right? Like rainbows and unicorns, you're reunited with your pets that you loved. I mean, it's just like this beautiful, no weeds grow there place. Mosquitoes have been removed. That's a personal,
Snakes and
thank you.
spiders
Yeah,
are no
snakes and
moss.
spiders, exactly. Or there's an actual, hey, is heaven where God, if you want to, like the higher being, the creator, is heaven where God lives? Is it in fact a place? Do we all reconvene there? Is it separate from this blue marble? So that's, I think, those are the two definitions that I think get floated around of heaven.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we come from the same religious background, and that's where, as we talk about these things, I like to put myself in the other, not in our religious background. Like,
Sure.
what is that thought process and what's going on in those? Because again, we're all using the same word, which would be heaven in this case, but we all have completely different, I don't know, conceptualizations of what that means and what that looks like for us internally, right?
Yeah, and this might be a topic for another time, but I think it's related to, so some of the Eastern religions talk about enlightenment, and that as we raise our vibration in our enlightenment here, or we almost refine our material to where we go from almost a disorganized, very dull light, that as we raise that frequency, we literally are almost like speeding up the atoms, which is energy. So we are turning ourselves into this being of energy, and that as we reach enlightenment, we, let's say, join up with the source of all of that, which is like God. So all of us are kind of on this path to be fully enlightened, which is to exist forever, but I don't know that we know exactly what that looks like. Are we then our own separate God of like light and energy? Because I think that even in the sciences, right, like energy doesn't just stop existing, like energy continues to exist. Or do we join up with the source of energy, and are we then still, one and the same with that God? And is that enlightenment? I mean,
This is an interesting piggyback off of our last one, though, because
Yeah.
our last one was on morality and what's good and bad. And is it the
Right.
thought that what's quote unquote good is going to raise that vibrational energy or whatever you want to call it, and what's bad is going to detract from that and kind of take away light, energy, whatever that may mean. And so I don't know, maybe that's what the morality play is I think, again, in general, most of the religions, wherever they are in the world, is be kind to other people, right? And to animals or
Right.
to whatever else. And so it's that respect for the world and respect for other creatures. Usually that behavior, if you're showing that respect, raises your energy. And if you aren't showing that respect, it decreases that energy.
Right. I think they are. I think even the 10 Commandments are some sort of a feeble attempt to sort of list out and put black and white markers on a general idea. So if you follow these, that's easier than saying, hey, when you tap into humanity and understand that we're all these beings of energy that may even return into one source of energy, we should all be behaving in this human universal way, and it's not, bickering or getting after each other, thinking that one is superior to another. And the commandments kind of say that, like, hey, don't hate your neighbor, like love your parents. And one way or another, it's almost like they're kind of a recipe for us at a lower level of vibration to say, hey, if you haven't figured it out yet, or you can't comprehend this higher idea, do these. And by doing those, if your vibration was here, now it's going to be, moved up. And I think that's an explanation that makes sense if in fact, that's what we're doing. And one question, go ahead.
Do you think we only have one shot at that?
So there have been a lot of times because I think a lot of these questions about raising our vibrational energy, because sometimes people think that means, well, I'll be more optimistic, or I'll have these positive, mantras that I'll repeat to myself. And just by doing that and believing in them and almost fake it till you make it, that's what that means. And I think that could be a part of what that means. But then that would mean, I don't know, being more honest, or being more like, how do you raise that vibrational energy? Is it honesty? Is it kindness? Is it seeking for enlightenment by detaching yourself from objects and possessions? there's a lot of different ideas about what that is. And yet if I'm trying to, let's say, be more honest or to honor my mother and my father better, like, especially on the ones that are a fight within myself, like, hey, how do I heal my soul? Or how do I, become a more patient, let's say even godlike person? Those ones are really hard because in this fallen state. And so even if I know about them and I'm aware and I'm trying to do things, humans, we kind of like these checkpoints. We kind of like to be able to look to somebody to say, hey, how am I doing? Or how is this working? What is my positive reinforcement? And a lot of the times, because those don't just go away. Like you're not just immediately honest tomorrow, or you're not just immediately like come perfectly at peace, like with Zen golf that I've talked about. Yeah. I still get super frustrated, and that's even on my personal level. So how do you know it's working? When you say to yourself, hey, I want to raise my vibration, I'm going to say these things and do these things, and I'm going to work on kindness and honesty and selflessness. And then you try that, and yet still I'll be selfless, let's say in my marriage, and still it seems like it goes over terribly. And I've done all these selfless things that I think are selfless, but like you talked about last time, your perception of the world or the action that you would want in the golden rule might not be the same. And so I'm thinking I'm doing something that's selfless or good to my spouse, and yet it falls flat on its face. And so then I feel like, well, that didn't raise my vibrational energy at all. So how do I know it's working? Like, how do I know I'm actually achieving higher checkpoints with this? It's a really complex idea.
But two books kind of came to mind as you were talking. One was The Alchemist, if you've read The Alchemist, and he's getting
Paul Coelho. Is that right?
I don't know how to pronounce that last name, but yeah, it sounds right. Paulo.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of more in tune with nature and the omens and making sure that he's going around and right, and like the life force is going to direct him to where he was meant to be, which actually is where he started, right? And so he was looking for this grand thing, and it was right under his nose. And then the other one was Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, right, where he's following those omens to the middle of Africa and he's wrestling people, and or it was a dream, right?
It was a dream.
Yeah, it was an interesting dream.
Halo is a great book.
Yeah. So anyway, that's
super interesting.
You're just like, I'm following what I feel like nature or the spirit or whatever it is trying to tell you, and you feel more in tune, or you feel like you're better able to recognize those signs, omens, whatever you want to call them, guideposts to raising that energy.
Right. And I do. And I think it's really bold because a lot of us aren't taught to do that. Most of us are taught to logically override those vibrational feelings, to say, well, that's crazy. Like, I'm not going to go to the middle of Africa or the middle of the Amazon because I had this dream. And yet I think he knew, I think he had, and these are the beautiful moments of life. He had moments when he was in those places where he had affirmation. This is exactly where I was supposed to be in this moment. Yeah. Did he create that, or did it create itself? I mean, but one way or another, I think that's exactly where he was supposed to be, even if he was the author of it. And those moments on earth are beautiful. And as to your heaven question, I can't imagine that this is the only crack at that. And if we really are, I mean, heaven in my mind is this infinite or eternal space. So it seems like that's a progression or a learning as we raise our vibrational energy that we'll have to be able to continue.
Yeah, I was thinking that I think a big part of, as I was reading Green Lights, I was like, oh, I want to do that, right?
Yeah.
Like, because I've had things like go somewhere, do something, and I don't. And I think a big part of that comes from fear. I think that through my life, at least, like in my head, I have kind of this programming of what I determined or what I think is successful or what I should be doing, right? If it's like, hey, sell this house that is comfortable. We live in a nice house, a nice neighborhood, good yard, dogs, everything, and go somewhere else and live there and experience life, because I brought that up last time too. Like, I want to experience life more. I want to experience more than just the little dome that I've lived in for 30 of the 32 years that I've been alive, right? But there's that fear of, well, what if it doesn't go as I had hoped? Or what if I don't become rich? Or what if I go bankrupt? Or what if? Right. And I think that part of that is just kind of releasing yourself to whatever, right? I think I can't remember who said it, but there was the quote of, right, we spend more of our time worrying about things that will never happen than we need to, right? Our biggest fears are never going to happen, but that's where we spend a lot of our time worrying about.
Oh yeah. And this one's a big one, right?
Yeah,
Death. I mean, it's that memento mori, right? Like fear of that we know our time is limited and our time is coming. In fact, so much so that we kind of pretend or ignore it until we're literally forced to stare into its face. And it makes some people become high anxious and crawl into bed and pull over the covers. And it makes others sort of light up and be effective and change to where they are using every day as though it's their last, kind of a thing. And really, it's just, it affects us differently, but it's certainly a huge motivator, and it depends on how we react to it.
Well, we had built this little app for funeral homes for people to get memories of those who had just passed, right? And so for people who visit the funeral, they could input those memories, because it's kind of a different perspective of the person who had died. It's not just the familial memories, but it's the extended network of friends, of how they knew them. And so in this capacity of building out this app, we had the chance to go meet with a lot of different funeral homes. We had a chance to go talk to a lot of people who had lost people in several ways, right? Some of them were tragic. Some of them were just, it was expected. Some of them was disease. And so I became a lot more aware of how much death is happening every day, right? And the tragic ones, unfortunately, I mean, the tragic ones, that person's life caves in, at least the loved one of that person's life can cave in. And what's crazy is that next second, somebody else somewhere in the world is having the same thing, same tragic death. And then the next second, somebody else. And so when it's your world, well, guess what? Like, everyone else is going through that as well. And so even with the belief in something after death, if you lose a child, or you lose a spouse, or you lose a close friend, or you lose someone in a quick and somewhat tragic way, it doesn't matter what your belief system is, or how much people say, oh, they're in a better place. Like, that is a devastating blow, because we don't know. I mean, there is the faith aspect of it, but we don't know until it happens. Or if these near-death experiences are real, maybe that's the assurance for those people. But
in that moment of high emotion, I completely agree. Like, you could have a very strong faith system, or even have known somebody who had a near-death experience. In that moment where your heart's been broken in two, you forced to question all of that. You really have to say to yourself, is that what I believe, and does it bring any solace? And most of the time it doesn't, right? Like, you're forced to question, are they really still around? Can I hear them? And I suppose that happens. I mean, people feel like their house isn't empty when they're, a widowed spouse. And that once again goes back to that, visual spectrum. Like, are they really there? Is it our brains making up tricks?
So do you believe in ghosts?
So, okay. I believe that both angels and demons exist here. And I guess when I say that, because demons makes me sound like a supernatural fan, which I am.
We're both
Jensen Ackles and Jared Padalecki.
He's in the new Purge, by the way, Jensen Ackles.
So I heard that, and then it caused a beef, which I also read about, but apparently they made up. But anyway, because Jared Padalecki got left out. It's a thing. I got to go brush up on it more. But
are they only allowed to do movies together now?
Well, I mean, that's kind of what the article pretty much implies, but it seemed like Jared was good about it. So let's call it, I don't know, this is even more confusing, but let's say angels on heaven's side, and then angels on the devil's side. Yeah. Or not heaven's side. And I think that because a lot of people have experiences where they feel like they had a guardian angel, and a miracle happened where they almost practically get pulled out of a crosswalk, like missed by a car. And it really, there's no way it could have happened. Like, there seems like there's a force or a person assisting that couldn't be seen by us. And I love that. I think it's Flat World, right? Where they make those comparisons of, hey, if you had a world that was on a flat surface and you were a circle, we being in 3 dimensions look down on that, and they can't see us because we only cross paths with them in that one flat plane. But yet there's infinite number of planes making up this third dimension, and they only exist in one. So if somehow we can extrapolate our minds to think of a fourth dimension, that's the same for us. Like somebody who's out there or somebody in a space we can't see, they know all about us and they're all around us, but really it's hard for them to breach this one of infinite number of three-dimensional planes or spaces. And we would have no idea that they're there. And yet because they exist in that higher space, they are very aware that they can see us. Like I always loved the example of that, let's call it a benevolent being existing in the higher dimension. So in three-dimensional space, seeing the circle, and maybe they have a tumor. And that benevolent being in the third space doesn't have to go in with a scalpel and knife through the outside of the circle. He can just remove it from here. And that would be a miracle to those people in that flat world. So I think that whether it's because they are habitating a space of that visual spectrum we cannot see, or because they exist in a higher vibrational space, so they're a more refined being, and so they can inhabit a higher dimension because of that in some way, where we're kind of trapped in this clay tabernacle third dimensional space. But yes, I think so. Not only do I believe in them, which I think ghost, it qualifies for angel on either side of this. I think they're here. I don't think they come and visit us like in an alien type of a way from another place.
I think I agree with you. I think that, and going even deeper on that, where you're talking about like angels for heaven and angels from kind of a devil aspect or hell or whatever you want to call it. That's one thing that I really struggle wrapping my head around is, at least from the religious background that we come from, the Satan character and the Satan figure and kind of the motivations there. And that's what leads me to believe there's something that we just don't understand.
Okay.
Because in characters, and we can get into other things like astral projection that we've talked about in the past, but there are these entities that it seems like they are encouraging good things, and then other entities that might be encouraging harm. And when I say good, right, it's just kind of alleviating pain or finding higher vibrational whatever. And the other one is trying to persuade to more pain or lower negative thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Lower vibration.
Sure. And that's what I think is so intriguing. So yeah, I think have I ever seen a ghost? No. Have I talked to people who say that they have? Sure. Do I think that those people that I've talked to are crazy in these instances? No. Like they're completely rational,
right,
logical, normal people that have seen interesting things. So.
A lot of the time they know that and they don't want to share. They almost reluctantly eventually have to share. And I guess that almost leads to a little bit of credence in their story, because it's like, even they see it kind of through our eyes to say, or through the general population's eyes to say, look, I know this sounds pretty unbelievable, but yeah, this happened.
Yeah.
And, I'm not going to deny it. Like I was able to experience it with my own eyes as I'm able to like see that lamp. Right. I mean, so yeah. And I believe them too. Like rational, logical, well-spoken beings humans that say that they saw something like that.
And you talked about the pre-heaven, was it?
Yeah, I did say pre-heaven.
Pre-heaven, yeah. So I think that's an interesting concept as well, again, from our religious system, we do believe that there was a pre-earth life, there's an earth life, and then there's a post-earth life. And it's kind of like, this is your shot, right? This is your one.
It feels that way. Yeah, that's how it's delivered.
Like Eminem, you've only got one shot.
One shot, good job. That's your chance to blow.
So, and I don't know, right? Like I don't know on that, because again, I've seen some incredibly believable stories of almost like a past life thing where they can recall details about a complete stranger in a completely different generation and it happens a lot in children, right? Like 5 years old-ish and younger, where they can express themselves, but they still have that kind of innocence where they're reciting very specific details. And in the few that I've watched and read about, I mean, when they are able to give a name, they do some pretty valid tests around like, okay, tell me what you think. And then they're able to boom, 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 all these facts about this person that lived 80 years before they were born. And you're like, how would that happen? How is that possible to happen?
The next step in logic, or the rational conclusion, being that they must have shared memories with, or experienced, or come from, they must be the same person, right? That's kind of what.
Yeah, the same spirit body, right? It's a different body, but maybe it's the same consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, that shared it. And we have kind of this veil of forgetfulness. Again, from our religion, there's the pre-earth life. Veil happens so that we're born and we can't remember what was happening. But I don't know if just as a child, maybe that veil is thinner, or maybe there's still those memories floating around and then you grow out of them. But I don't know. I like reincarnation to me seems plausible. And I don't know if it's necessarily a human going into, now I'm going to be a dog in the next life or whatever, but human to human, or maybe it is. Maybe the animals have a certain vibrational energy from their consciousness perspective. And if they fulfill whatever their purpose is, that they can advance. I don't know. I think there's a lot of, is it Hinduism that believes in the reincarnation stuff?
I don't want to be an expert, but it's certainly an Eastern religion, and it could be. But then there are many different. Because I think like Sikhism might as well, but
yeah, and it's kind of like that is the judgment, right? Like how you do here determines your next life, your next where you're going to fall in the hierarchy.
Whether you kind of move up or move down. If you did well here, you move up. If you did poorly, then you move down. And they know, like I think tree is like a move down. Tiger is like a move up. And so, they talk about that. And so if you're a tiger now, then you did great last time.
It's so interesting though. And it's something that.
And is that heaven or hell? Because that seems crazy. Like to think, because I think our human minds that are bound by finite time somehow think about that being like an endless loop, which I think in many movies has been portrayed as a type of hell.
Yeah.
So,
well, let's go into that, because I think I've talked about this with you before, but when we talk about a Jesus figure, that Jesus Christ coming, and the atonement, at least in our comprehension of it, is that in this shorter amount of time over the course of 3 days, he goes through everything. He feels every pain. He feels both physical, emotional. He feels everything that could ever happen. And that's what qualifies him as a savior mediator, is that no matter how bad we feel or no matter what pain we experience, we can go to him and he will alleviate that through his personal experience of experiencing that, right? So he experiences it, boom. That can be loneliness, that can be death, that can be sorrow, tragedy, happiness, whatever.
And I do think the time thing comes into play here, because I think 3 days to our brains may not be the 3 days he experienced. He could have been, compounded 4 layers deep to where he really experienced an eternity for each of us, or something to that effect, where, that's a complex idea, but however he did it, it was perfect. And it squeezed into what we know of as 3 days.
Well, and I think through kind of our conversation about the greedy rich person, right? That is a temptation or trial or experience that they have to deal with, right? And we all look at these billionaires that go bankrupt, or that they get heavy into drugs or whatever. It's like, oh, if I had that much money, I would have handled it better, right? I would have lived my life and not thrown it all away like they did. And man, if it's in, If I Was a Rich Man.
Oh, Fiddler on the Roof.
Fiddler on the Roof, right? And he's like, yeah, if riches are a curse, then curse me.
Curse me 7 ways to Sunday.
Yeah. So that's where I'm like, okay, so if the Jesus Christ figure experiences that all in this time, whatever that loop looks like, maybe through the reincarnation thing, that's where, we will have to experience everything. We will have to experience losing a limb. We will have to experience being murdered. We will have to experience severe loneliness where we never find a soulmate and are able to make that connection. Loss of all of these things, but also the joy. We're going to have to experience, okay, you think you can do better as a rich person? Go try. Like, your next life, that's what's going to happen, right? You're going to be put in situations to where that could come to pass. And how are you going to handle the world being your oyster and you being able to do whatever you want with essentially no consequences. And so
I think it's a beautiful idea. I mean, if you pull away the restrictions or the idea that we feel bottled in by linear time, and you take that away to where time is now infinite and all in front of you, like that's a different way to think about the atonement, in that we know he experienced everything, and that's how he can be the perfect mediator to succor our sins and give us forgiveness using his atonement. But to think that maybe he actually had the time to go experience all of them for everyone, and so that's how it happened. You know, we somehow think that it was like this by proxy, or that he had it all microcosmed into these seconds and, just like you said, downloaded into him. But instead, if time wasn't a thing and we weren't inhibited in this linear space, and each of us, like maybe you've talked about this before, like, is our path that at some point we have to be on a similar path of progression to where we maybe have to save others, or in our progression to godhood, like if we're at a level, let's call it a level 0 now, because we're not divine. I mean, there's a piece of us in us that's divine. That's that vibrational energy that we can try to raise. But if we succeed, then we've raised ourselves to a level 1 God. And so how high is Christ now? And how high is, God now? Is God at a level, do you have to be a level 15 before you can create a sun? And once you're at a level 15, is there higher to create a galaxy of millions of suns? And how do we make that progression to follow in those steps?
And that's what's so interesting. I got to find that video.
Does time matter? Yeah.
I got to find that video that you were describing about the 2-dimensional Flatlander.
Yes.
And then the 3-dimensional thing that can see the different things, right? Because, right, like when I think what is a God, right? And the definition that we've used for as long as the earth has been around and people have been trying to attribute things to gods, a lot of that is there is a being or entity that understands things that we don't. And then as we use our 2-dimensional language to try and describe a 3-dimensional thing that is so abstract that we don't really understand or know. And so we could be completely wrong, right? And even as I was just finished a book called Our Mathematical Universe, and it's going into the theoretical physics and the math behind the thought that there are potentially infinite universes, right? Our universe is so big we can't see to the end of it, and it's expanding and everything else. But when there's this infinite space, our brains think in a finite way of like, how can there be infinite universes? That's infinite space. Like, yeah, it could be. And because of the numbers and infinity, that's where the multiverse comes in, or these parallel universes, whatever you want to call them. Because if there's an infinite number of universes and an infinite number of possibilities of an Earth happening, that means that theoretically there are an infinite number of copies of me that have lived every second exactly as I have up until right now. Now the odds of that are infinitesimally small, but with infinity, it means it's happening, right? Sure. And so it's such an interesting concept. So when we talk about what is a God, and when we try and logically wrap our brains and put words to it, I think it is those levels of, again, at least in our religion, the claim is that eventually we can become like a God. And so that means that there's some sort of a level of attainment of energy, knowledge, understanding that exists, and you can get to that. And like you said, is a level 15 mean, okay, now you know how to do things? But when we talk about those miracles and everything else, one of the theories I have, and we call it priesthood, at least in our religion, right, of giving some sort of a priesthood power where you can do things. I think it's a technology that we just don't understand. We don't have it, right?
A brilliant idea. It's once again a failure of our language, but yeah, a technology or a way to, connect or manipulate at the quasar level or the atomic level, and understanding that if you really understood that science at that level, then maybe, and you knew how those things fully operated and how they're influenced, then you could maybe turn them into a sun, or turn them into a galaxy, or turn them into a black hole.
Even smaller though, right? Like healing, right? There are all these stories in the Bible of healing.
Or water to wine.
Sure, but even taking a blind man, he spits in the dirt, rubs mud on his eyes, and now he can see, or hearing or curing the deaf, or palsy or anything else, and you look at the stuff that we're able to do now, right? Of blind people can see, or there are all these videos, right, of a kid hearing his mother's voice for the first time. So it's a deaf person that's able to hear.
Or putting on those glasses that show color where somebody has been colorblind. Yeah.
Right. And so the technologies out there exist. And again, we've talked about this before, but you take like the Scandinavian gods and Thor, the god of thunder, right? If you go back 2,000 years and you've got a taser that's making a little lightning bolt, like, you're like, whoa, like you're the god of thunder, and you have a little lighter, and now you're the god of fire, right? It's just these little technology pieces that I think exist out there, and this could get to aliens conversations. Which
I was going to say, how many conspiracy theories are there about the pyramids? Like no one thinks that the technology could possibly have existed to be as precise and gargantuan as those projects were, like without cranes.
Yeah.
And I know that there's theories out there, but all of them are a little bit of a stretch, and we don't know. And what they appear to have done is shocking. And on a kind of a side note, then they go and build a pyramid Luxor in Las Vegas, and even engineers and cranes and everything couldn't completely estimate how that would, like how the weight would, like, because there's so much weight in the center of a pyramid that one started to sink in the middle, even though it didn't sink on the ends. And I mean, they're in the middle of the desert over there where it feels like you're in quicksand all the time. And yet they knew what they knew. How did they do that? It's incredible. And so that was a technology thing. Like, did they have technology? They have hieroglyphics that make it look like they had a lot more, almost maybe even computers of some variety, even though all that's been wiped out. But it makes you wonder, like, if they had something different than we think they did.
So you believe in a pre-Earth thing? We're here. There's something else after. I
believe that we are energy beings. Like, and I do think that there's an explanation for why we're inhabiting bodies right now. And that fight gets talked about a lot, where, you know, the body part is lazy and it likes to indulge in pleasure, which we talked a little bit about last time. And yet oftentimes that pleasure affects people around us and other humans, which I don't think raises our vibrational energy. I think it lowers it. And so how are we able to have more discipline, or how are we able to raise and move towards that spiritual side? Another way to say raise our vibrational energy and sort of have a victory over all of those things that body is telling us to do instead, that pulls us down. And so that energy being, truly being at the core of us, like truly our consciousness or our existence, I don't think those come and go. I don't think those just pop out of creation when we die. I don't think we just popped into creation in some sort of similarity to like the Big Bang when we were born. I think that energy being, that consciousness existed before, even if it was in a slightly different way, so we can't remember it. And I think it continues in some way that I don't completely have clarity on afterward.
And this goes into maybe your question from last time, but in a different way, is why does it feel like the physical body and that spiritual energy being are kind of in opposition to each other, right? Of this.
Right. That almost feels like a cruel joke. Like if the creator really kind of did that on purpose, let's say, well, I might need to have a talk with him. I don't think that was very nice, right? Like, why would you do things that seem like they're almost like logical, rational deductions of like, hey, I'm going to pursue a thing that makes sense and feels good, versus actually the real clue is ignore all those against all of the intuition that you have, if you will, and do the thing that maybe if you work real hard feels right, or maybe doesn't feel right at all, but when you weigh it or you look at other examples and you identify that there's a higher, better way, however you've come to that conclusion without real-time experience, do that one instead, even though all these other voices are screaming at you that I gave you to do the other one. Yeah, it's
but
pretty
even
brutal.
Contextually, right? Like, again, we can go to sex as an example, right? Because contextually, within a marriage, if we want to call it that way, and again, this is throwing on a certain belief system, so I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong, but one of the propositions is that sex should only happen in marriage, right? So in that context, it is a thing that does raise your energy. It's moving towards a good purpose. It's fulfilling. It's bringing two souls to one, and you're able to achieve a feeling and a nirvana that you can't get any other way. But then outside of that context, no, bad.
Right,
Right.
right. Well, that's
even though
one
it's the
of
same
the
action.
Yes, that's one of the main failures that makes, I think our belief system can really mess people up when it comes to sex, because it is so celebrated and desired and wanted in marriage. And yet, like, it's literally overnight. Like, it's avoid, bad, no. And then all of a sudden it's like, yes, all the time. Like, please don't stop. Like, make sure that it happens. And that transition kind of can mess with you a little bit. The fact that you kind of taboo it and don't even talk about it. So it's hard to have a healthy relationship with a topic when that's how it's treated. And then all of a sudden you're supposed to be an expert who's fully comfortable with it in a very healthy space and a healthy relationship with it on all fronts, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional. And that's a hard transition. And there's not a class or a school or a boot camp that kind of moves you from that no space into that now it's okay and celebrated space. It's super hard.
And even I think that you can still achieve those feelings outside of marriage, right? Like, meaning that if you're committed to that partner, right. And again, I don't know that some tax document or legal document that says, okay, now you're married, so if someone dies, then your inheritance can go to that person, right. Then changes the dynamic. Now, when it's coming to like a one night stand type of a thing and there's not really an emotional connection, I personally don't think that that's the same level, but who am I to judge, right? I don't know how death just got turned into
sex, because we're going to be all sex sales. It's all going to be sex all the time. sex.
No, but again, I as we move through this life and go into the next, I hope, right? I guess that's the best way for me to describe it, is I hope that there's something after this. And I hope that we have a better understanding of what's going on, and that we're raised to a different dimension where, and that's my theory, is that we're going to get to where we can see a bigger picture once you die and you're in that realm of whatever, where you can see other things, and you're going to be like, oh, whoops. I was so stupid.
Wait. Who was right?
Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, there's
and that's a good point. It's interesting too, though, because it doesn't seem like, in astral projection, people that have given that story, or the interactions that they've had with people that they encounter when they've made it there, whether it's for 30 seconds or I guess if it's forever, they didn't come back to tell us about it, but that, those people that they've observed or seen they're not lounging around, sipping out of wine glasses, popping grapes, getting, fanned by palm leaves. Like, they've arrived and the time has come and now we understand it all. It's more like they're still on a journey of progression as well. So even if, let's say you graduate into this fourth dimension afterward, and that's death. Well, maybe then the new task is graduating to the fifth dimension. It's just a new journey. So
that brings me back to the conceptualization of heaven and hell, right? Because if in the instance that we described, the experience that I described, another that I've either experienced or heard about, where it's that thought transfer, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a communication with words, and it's just an understanding of thoughts. If we take like a heaven as an example, are people, based on their thoughts or their desires or who they are as a person internally, are they comfortable living or at least occupying the space where everybody knows your thoughts? If you can't hide what you're thinking and you can only say, oh, this is what's on my mind, right? And it's not good. Are you comfortable there? Or are you going to be like, you know what? I'm going to go down a little bit to where we can hide or we can mask or whatever it is, right? Because at least from a biblical context, I was like, yeah, I want to hide under a mountain because I don't want everyone knowing what I've done or what I think or what I believe or what I want to do. And then there are others who are like, yeah, whatever. You can know what my thought is. And it's a pure, good intentioned thought. And
I think that is an easy way to back into why should we do anything to raise our vibration here instead of pursuing those things that feel good. All of a sudden now we have this, well, if I raise my vibration, and let's call it eradicating seedy thoughts. Let's say that's one of them, right? Because I think that's one of the things you're pointing to is that if somebody, somebody's wife walks by and she's really cute and I have that thought in this dimension where everybody knows exactly what I'm thinking, and that's clearly not appropriate for this high of a group of people who have all through work and achievement and effort achieved a higher vibrational state where seedy thoughts have been eradicated from the entire race. Well, I'm not going to fit. Like
everybody stops and just turns into you.
Right. And we're all 7 dimensions and he's a 5. So he doesn't belong here. Absolutely. And so that's why it makes a little bit of sense of like, hey, I don't know what the 7th dimension looks like, but if it's true that all of them have arrived at a type of godhood elite, not elite, that's a terrible word, but like higher refined state, and that's including, everybody knows the power of thoughts here, but if that means removing all of those base, seedy thoughts, well, it doesn't just happen. You don't just get, shazammed into being in a 7th dimension state. You've had to put in effort to where you in fact removed your seedy thoughts, and then all of a sudden you're in that space where everybody can read your thoughts and you're totally comfortable being there because you've done the work to arrive to where you'll have no thoughts that make you uncomfortable in a space of others who have also done that, and everybody can read everybody's thoughts. And that idea really shows a clear progression of what it is we're trying to do and why there's levels to get to, levels we can't see. Because if you knew that, let's say there is a level 7 being hanging around and they know all your thoughts, like, that might change how you behave. Like if my grandma was coming back and she happened to dip into level 5 in her progression, and so she can come back and read all level 3 thoughts in my brain. If I was somehow aware of that, I mean, it shouldn't, because my relationship with, I guess, God should change the way and make me aware that, hey, nothing is secret. Like everything is going to be out there. But somehow we do behave as humans thinking that that's the case. And so we choose to stay here to not raise our vibrational energy because, I don't know, because it feels good or because we're lazy or because we're giving in. And when you think about it in that way, it almost is like, oh, that's what progress means.
Well, going back to our last episode, though, of treating others how they want to be treated, I think that as you and I look at this, because I think we both like to learn and we like to explore and we want to find answers to stuff, even though we acknowledge that we won't find them now or possibly ever. I think there are people who are like, you know what, I don't care, right? Especially from a missionary perspective and a religion that's trying to go out and say like, how could you not want this, right? Like the way you're living your life could potentially prevent you from experiencing this. And like, you know what, I really don't care, right? Like 99.999% of the people that we talk to on our mission were like, yeah, whatever. Like, I don't care. And then you'd come across the one who was like, okay, I'll talk to you. You're like, yay, someone wants to talk to me. But yeah, I think that I would assume that we're going to be in a place that, I don't know, hell is where there's this gnashing of teeth in this awful, miserable place. But is that because they're forced into an area where all of their thoughts and actions are known and they aren't comfortable with that? Or is that just that they're still limited in a 2D, 3D realm where they're like, oh man, like I'm stuck here. I'm damned in the sense of like a water dam of I can't get any more understanding or knowledge of how the universe works. So I'm kind of stuck here. And then others are, progressing on to other galaxies or whatever they want to build in the other world.
And if progression is really that important, if that really is kind of what we're trying to figure out how to do here. I read something just today, which is why it's on my mind, that said at the end of this one, so this iteration or this dimension, whatever you want to call it, you will meet or have to have a face-to-face with the person you could have become, and you'll be the person that you are. So then all of a sudden, that would be a pretty quick learning curve too. And if that's really, is that hell? Like, did you stop working such that that disparity is so large that it feels like hell because you get to see that person? Or do you actually get encouraged to say, oh, like I didn't miss the mark by too much. I'm excited to keep going. Interesting thought.
Well, and with the theories that we've brought up, right, of the multiverses, the parallel universes, the past lives, the reincarnation, the future, whatever, that's where I wonder if that consciousness in these instances is gathering those multiple lives, multiple memories, whatever.
Right.
And that's where
Bringing
we are
them
like,
all into one.
we do kind of either remember or meet our past life self. We're like, oh, like the life that I lived this time was a little better or worse than the one I lived last time. And all right, give me another chance. Like, let me go back in there, right? And try
what
again.
kind of a school would that be to meld all 40 of those, or maybe even infinite number of consciousnesses? Nope.
That sounded right.
That was perfectly pronounced. Thanks, everybody. Diction class.
We did have a speech language pathologist on our last one,
Oh,
so
that's
maybe she
right.
could help you.
Consciousnesses.
Consciousness.
I don't think that's right. That can't be. I'm sure that's not a word. But that, like, imagine. I mean, that's 50 realities all of a sudden in one, and that's a lot of experience.
I know what's the most frustrating part of this whole conversation is, again, because we're this 2D thing, is that we're going to get there and like, you were way wrong. You're not even close.
No.
You just wasted an hour and 16
They're all
minutes.
sitting here in this room, in this dimension we can't see.
They're like
just
yelling. No, you're way off. Turn left. Oh.
So how do we end, or how do we wrap up this conversation on what do you think heaven is, or death and near-death experiences?
Well, let's conclude it with your final thoughts. Like, what do you think it is? And I'll share what I think it is. What is your relationship with death currently? And what is your understanding of what could come after? In a quick synopsis.
Well,
quicker
there
than your
is
food.
sorry, I can tell that's not going to happen next time. We're going to have one iteration of Brandon's Food Corner.
Brandon's food truck.
So recently, because 5 years ago, I don't know that I'd have been so versed on being able to talk about raising our vibration, or, our thoughts being a big part of it, or, that idea that heaven and hell is kind of here, whether that's because it's in this place we can't see, or because it's the things that we create for ourselves. Similar to that example of seeing the gap that you didn't achieve by staring yourself in the face at the end of this life. So, what do I think heaven is? I think one way or another, because look, like you said, I don't know, and I haven't had a near-death experience, and I haven't talked to a ghost or talked to really anybody that has. I do think that aspect of progression is important. And I think that heaven and hell, if they exist right here. And it's hell if we've created some sort of a space where we've made it very uncomfortable for us to sit, whether through, secrecy, or whether through double standards, or whether through lying to ourselves because we never looked at ourselves in the mirror, ignoring the fact that progress was important. We create that disparity that then makes us feel like it's fire and brimstone, makes us feel super uncomfortable that we don't want to exist there. So we're almost willing to take a downgrade in order to get back to a space where we're more comfortable. And similarly, as we push out that frequency of higher vibrations to whether it's helping others, whether it's looking past the end of our nose at others, like you talked about in the last one, whether it's trying to achieve a discipleship because we set an ideal of a very high frequency being like Christ or like Gandhi or Buddha, to where it's a very high set of ideals that we are trying to perfect ourselves, if you will, and reach enlightenment. That then creates a heaven, a space where we're very comfortable, where we don't have these anxieties, and we have reached a nirvana, a euphoria, a very content, peaceful place. But one way or another, I am of the belief that heaven and hell are of our authorship more than, and at least that's what we should be concerning ourselves with here in this particular addition in this linear time space than we should be with like Kolob and planets and distance and aliens and sitting lion with lamb with grapes and fern leaves or whatnot. I think that's more how I have, at least at 39 years old, view heaven and hell.
Used fern leaves and palm leaves. So
I know. Was one of those wrong? I'm pretty sure fern leaves is probably wrong. Should I just say poison ivy?
You're being fanned with poison oak.
That would be hell, I think.
Yeah. So I genuinely believe, and I hesitate to say anything around I know, because the more I try and learn and experience, the more I realize like I don't know anything. But through experiences that I've shared with you, where I've had things where it wasn't a dream, right? It wasn't because I know what dreams are. I've had
hallucination.
It wasn't a hallucination. Even lucid dreams, right? I've had lucid dreams where I fully am conscious and aware of the fact that I'm dreaming and can make things happen in a dream, right? Mm-hmm. There's another level there where, similar to what we've talked about from a near-death experience, but it wasn't a near-death experience, and where I'm communicating with something. So I believe there is something else there. There's some world that we can't see with beings that occupy it. And my belief, and at least my hope, is that death is just that transition from the body, this meat suit or whatever you referred to it before.
Yep.
Where the consciousness is at least part of this, and experiencing things that physically you would need a body to touch, to feel, to experience those certain sensations that you couldn't otherwise take it as a spiritual or consciousness entity. And then we move on to another. And at least in our belief system, the proposal, I guess, is that we get resurrected and that we get bodies again, right? Perfected bodies. And what that looks like, I have no idea. Is heaven something of our own creation where we're golfing all the time and we're just playing sports and I can dunk again and I don't have to worry about things? I don't know that it's that. I don't believe that it's that, but I would like to think that it's something where we still have some sort of a purpose and we're still learning to do things that we wouldn't be able to do with a body that is ours, right? There are certain, take it even as like speed, right? Traveling from one place to another, our bodies inhibit us from going certain
speed of light
speeds, right? Because of G's in our organs, and we're soft and fleshy and we'll just explode or implode or whatever else. So yeah, I guess my beliefs are that there is something after death and that there is this world around us, and that heaven is where we'll be comfortable, where we'll feel most comfortable.
Yeah.
And if anyone wants to argue with us, we're totally open to that, because
come on the show.
We could be completely
give
wrong.
us a third point of view to
That's a good point, though. If anyone has seen ghosts, astral projections, near death, like that's somebody that I'd be interested in talking.
You know, it's interesting, and I'm not going to advocate for it, but like there was a show on Netflix that the very crux of much of the storyline was surrounding a PhD professor who studied NDEs. And eventually he abandons his morality of even like humanity, of people, because the study of the NDE is more important than like humans. And so he actually turns humans into lab rats and like forces them into NDEs.
Whoa. This is a real thing?
Well, it's a real Netflix show. Is that what you mean?
But I mean, did this happen in real life, or is this a fictional?
I sure hope not, because it's terrifying the first time this happens, because a lot of them all come back, and I don't know if he, drugs them, but I think part of the wearing off aspect of the NDE is that they can't remember. And so it's terrifying, and obviously then, but yeah, I mean, NDEs are a thing, and a lot of people talk about them.
There are studies around astral projection stuff.
Oh, right.
That are funded and everything, where they're trying to see if they can consistently get people to have these out-of-body experiences that are not NDEs. They're controlled and really happening. And
humans traveling in in a way we don't believe or comprehend, right? I mean, Doctor Strange type stuff.
Right.
And I think that's probably even fueled probably a lot of that astral projection stuff because he's proficient at it.
Well, and I have a brother who, from the religious standpoint, kind of took himself out of the circle and was like looking at it from a different angle. And he was like, look, if you're in terms of proving a God or proving angels or visitations or whatever, he's like, look, if you want to take it a science perspective, there's just so many experiences of people where they have seen things and had these experiences where you can't discredit it, right? And you can't just say everybody was crazy.
Right.
Now, from the science perspective, it's can you replicate it? Can one person take the same 10 steps and get the same result? And then it becomes whatever the theory or whatever you want to call it. And so I don't know about that, right? Like even if you pray hard, are you going to have it be visited by an angel? I don't think so. So, but at the same time, there are too many stories that are just match up too well for it to be chance or psychosis or whatever else you want to call it, in my opinion.
Which for another episode and another date, like alien stories are all fairly similar to alien abduction stories. And so
Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about that on Joe Rogan.
Oh, he does. Yeah, which makes that interesting because it's like using the same logic of deduction. And does that make alien abduction stories all true? They couldn't have all been crazy.
I don't know. Right? Neil says like at this point it would have been captured on a cell phone, so he doesn't think that they're real.
Oh, interesting. Well, he's credible. I mean, I like that guy a lot. He's very smart.
All right. So hashtag Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Hashtag Crumble.
Hashtag Joe Rogan.
NDE.
Hashtag
the show on Netflix, if anybody wanted to know, because I don't think I mentioned it, is called The OA.
Oh, okay.
And it's so the first time you see it and like you realize he's abducted somebody because he's going to push them through NDEs just so he can study them. You're like, I can't. It makes you uncomfortable.
I think that's on Hulu. I don't think that's Netflix.
Oh, well, it was Netflix for sure.
Because I've seen the OA. I've never watched the show though, so I didn't know that's what it was.
And it gets a little bit, as with all Netflix shows. I mean, the writers had a great idea. The first series does something, meaning you feel something, and even if it is like a level of discomfort, but the story's like, okay. And then obviously, season 1 ends. I don't think they knew they were going to get renewed. Then they come back. Then the writers have to come up with something else. And so, hey, it's good, but like it starts to be like, is this connected to the original story? Or like, is this what they meant to do originally? And it's probably not. They just are trying to make cliffhangers after every episode and after every season. And that's, look, I get it. But that idea of NDEs being a thing that was so important that a PhD felt justified in killing them repeatedly to have them experience these NDEs was a bit of a mind melt. Yeah.
Mind meld. They're
right?
melding minds.
That's two minds together, isn't it? Mind. I can't say I can't. Yeah. Okay. Mind, brain matter on the wall. Like that's the long.
Mind blowing.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. Mind blowing.
All right. We'll end it with
mind blowing. Hashtag
blown.
mind blowing. Brandon's so loquacious that he doesn't have words.
Consciousness.